Welcome. Let's take a look at what I call my Top Gun example. So you're applying to an elite Top Gun school and you're competing among the best and brightest students for entry, and part of the application is an exam. So you take the exam and answer 96% of the questions correctly, which is an excellent score. So you're confident you're going to get into Top Gun. However, you later learn that your exam score of 96% ranked in the 70th percentile, and so now you're a bit concerned about your chances of getting in. So let's see if we can visualize here what that percentile is telling you about your relative standing compared to other test takers. All right, so just a small visual here with just 10 people. Generally with percentiles, we're looking at large data sets, but this is a nice little visual. So I've got 10 people here, and you scored in the 70th percentile. So what that means, and so I'm going to put you here, that's your score. So your score was 96%. But being in the 70th percentile means that about 70% of students would have scored lower. So 7 people here out of 10, 70%. So 70% of scores were lower than yours. But that means that these other 3 out of 10 people scored higher. So 3 out of those 10, that's the other 30%. So those visually 3 out of 10 students, so 30% are higher scores. So if the school can only take the people in the top 30% or 20% or 10%, so those very elite of the elite, even though your score was good, excellent, actually, the problem is with the best and the brightest students, everybody gets great grades. And so there were some people that outperformed your great score. All right, so a score in the 70th percentile means that about 70% of test takers scored lower than you. So our common use definition of percentile, it indicates the percent of data lower, percent of data below. So if 70% scored lower than the other 30%, because 100% minus the 70% would give you the remaining 30%. Oops, sorry, I was just going to show you the work there. So 100% minus the 70% below, because you're at the 70th percentile, leaves you with 30% of people that scored higher. All right, so the summary here is that your percentage score, that was the 96%, told you what proportion of questions you answered correctly. So 96 out of 100. So a lot of questions correct for sure, but your percentile value 70 is indicating not how many you got correct, but your position relative to the other exam takers. All right, and then let's just take a look at a couple questions here, and I'm going to take a look at some bell curves. So it says last year, 13,000 students took an entrance exam at a certain university. So pretty large group of students here. Scores on the exam follow a bell-shaped distribution. Daniel scored at the 10th percentile. Lakeisha scored at the 85th percentile. So before I start just answering questions, let me do a couple graphs. So I will do Daniel here on top. So of all the students taking the test, the value at the center of the distribution would be the 50th percentile. And that would also be the mean on a bell-shaped curve, but right now we're going to discuss percentiles. So half of students below that score, half of students above that score. Daniel here was at the 10th percentile, so 10 is less than 50, so Daniel is over here somewhere, P10. And 10th percentile tells me that 10% of scores were lower than Daniel. And I'm going to kind of come up here and draw an arrow here representing those are scores that were lower. And that would mean that all the unshaded scores to the right of Daniel, above Daniel, would be the other 90%. 100% minus 10% would leave me 90%. Okay, that's Daniel's picture. Let's take a look at Lakeisha. So for Lakeisha, so there's the 50th percentile. Lakeisha is at the 85th percentile. So P85 is going to be somewhere to the right of center, P50. So Lakeisha's in better shape here because she scored higher than 85% of scores. So in other words, 85% of scores were below Lakeisha. I'll go ahead and just label it here with an arrow. So those are the 85% of scores lower. And that would mean the scores that were higher, 100% minus 85%, would leave the remaining 15% of scores. All right, and once we have that visual, we can answer some questions here. So which of the following must be true about Daniel's score? All right, A. So Daniel answered 10% of the questions correctly. So they gave us no indication of the percent he earned on the exam. So that was the reason for discussing the difference here. Percentage is not the same as percentile. So we don't know percentage of questions that he got correct. All right, I'm just going to cross that one out. Right, Daniel was in the top half of scores. Well, no, actually, he was down here in the bottom half, not up here in the top half. So that's not correct. Daniel missed 90 questions. So again, we don't know how many he got right or wrong. That's not what percentile tells us. So that is not the case. And then Daniel scored lower than about 90% of students who took the exam. So that makes sense. There's Daniel. He's lower than 90% of students. So that's D. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Which of the following must be true about Daniel's and Lakeisha's scores? All right, Lakeisha answered 55 more questions correctly than Ruben. And again, we don't know how many either of them got correct or incorrect. Both Daniel and Lakeisha scored above the median. So let's discuss median here. So the 50th percentile, the center of a bell curve, is the 50th percentile. It's also the mean. It's also the median. So that value in the middle position when our data is put in order. So Daniel here actually is below the median. It's Lakeisha that's above the median. So it's not B here. And it's not C. So that one is none of the above. And then finally, which of the following must be true about Lakeisha's score? So Lakeisha here scored lower than about 85% of students who took the exam. And actually, no, she's just lower than these 15%. Lakeisha answered 15% of questions correctly. We don't know what percent she got right or wrong. So B and C are out. And then D, Lakeisha scored lower than about 15% of students that took the exam. So D. All right, it's just coincidence that all three answers were D here. Well, not pure coincidence. I just wanted to be able to talk through a variety of cases. But there you go. There's your summary of percentiles. So your percentile value, like 85, tells you the percent of data lower, and therefore you can always find the percent of data higher by subtracting from 100.